if I don't stop, I'll be burning out. When the pressure builds up, I'ma double down on you. I don't know if it's worth it, all this strain, and I'm still working, I know. I drew a line, but it's blurring. I can't cover pain with curtains, I know. So where do I go when I'm low? When all my faith is running out, and I can't help but feel like I know the system is broke. The expectation pull me down. Young and I got so much left to lose. So what am I to do? I got the self-deprecating blues. Where my money though? I got receipts stacked up.
So, there, by the way, that's Tyler Miller with Self-Deprecating Blues. I actually contacted him out of the blue. There's sort of a rule here. I won't go to the details, but we have a certain music license. So things have to fall under the music license for us to use them. And I wasn't sure, so I emailed Tyler out of the blue. And he said, yes, the song was all ready to go. And then he asked a few questions. What kind of show is this anyway? And I said, it's the kind of show where we're going to play a minute and 15 seconds of your song. But I like that song. I really do too. So, okay, it's Ask or Tell Me Anything. So let me explain the rules. There are no rules. 888-720-9677 is the number that you will get the best results. If you call another number and try to ask or tell the person who answers anything, I can't really predict what will happen. But you can call 888-720-WNPR and say, what is on your mind? And I know what's on most people's minds, and that's fine. If they want to talk about that, I am so ready for it. Of course, I'm referring to... No, never mind. Let's go right to Mike in Woodbury. We'll get things going for us. Here is... Hi, Mike. You're on the air.
Hi, Colin. How are you?
All right.
It seems like Trump has very slightly dialed back the situation, what's going on in Minneapolis, as if replacing Bonvino with Tom Homan is like a big improvement.
I know. That's when you know you have a problem with your bench. You know, the problem with your bench is, who's our best guy? Tom, come on, you go in there.
Right.
See if they have a Cava restaurant. See if you can get one in the bags again. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Exactly. But my big concern is because of the backlash. And because of the fact that his polling numbers are receding somewhat, not enough in my opinion. I think he's still at 41% disapproval, which still seems high to me. But anyway, that he's going to be even more panicked and desperate about the midterm elections. And, Ann Applebaum and other, experts on authoritarians have said that one of the reasons for sending out these troops into the streets is not only to deal with ostensible illegal aliens, but to inure the public to the idea that there's troops in the streets. Hey, well, this is kind of normal now. To the point where he could be sending them to polling places in November supposedly to prevent illegal voting, which, as we know, hardly exists at all. And how many Latinos are going to want to go vote in these swing states if they think that there's a bunch of armed DEA troops in the polling places? So I think he's going to be even more determined to make sure that the Republicans don't lose the midterms.
I would just sort of add a couple of little wrinkles to that. I think the thing that probably got his attention the most, I mean, everything that you say is true, and I was just looking at G. Elliott Morris's newsletter, Strength of Numbers. I didn't get a chance to. It just moved when I started to go on the air here, but I think the first thing that happened was Republicans in Congress themselves said they couldn't support this anymore. And it was really surprising how many people, said that. Now, those responses have to be divided, as you suggest, into two groups. One of them is the group of people going, I don't think I can win my election under these circumstances. Something has to change. I'm up for office in November. But I also think that there are Republicans for whom this was a bridge too far. In fact, there are Republicans in Congress for whom the bridge too far happened 2 or 3 bridges ago, but they didn't really have the guts to do it, or it just seemed to them like the pain that would come out of it or loss of communion with Trump was not worth it. But I think some people are against this. Some Republicans in Congress are against this on principle. And when that happened, when it became clear, and so one of the things he really doesn't want to have to go through is another shutdown, particularly a shutdown with this tagged to it, with American deaths by on-street execution tagged to it. That makes it a really, really, so the shutdown would be the next thing that's coming. It's probably coming anyway. And then, the pushback that he was getting from people in Congress right now, whom he needs to support all these other things. And I don't think there's any way to get out of this easily for him. I think that there's going to be a strong movement to impeach Kristi Noem. That I wouldn't be surprised if it got to a vote. We'll find out what Republicans in Congress are willing to put up with and what they're not. But yeah, he's got the midterms on his mind as well. And I think the other thing to say is, and it'll be said a lot, shout out to the people of Minneapolis. I mean, they basically, one of the things that I want to say to people who are questioning this whole thing and are still kind of a little bit on the side of the president and ICE is, which looks more like America to you? A whole bunch of people really putting their safety on the line for their neighbors, caring about their neighbors, doing the right thing for their neighbors, showing up, at peril to themselves on behalf of other people, or masked enforcement agents carrying weapons, grabbing people with, without presenting any identification and taking them off to God knows where, or shooting people and just leaving the scene, which looks more like America, the America that you recognize. And I think one thing that Minnesota did was just embarrass the crap out of Trump and these goons, because it just really is. The optics of it are horrible. It's amazing that they haven't paid a higher price, because the optics are so bad. But it at least got his attention. The other quick thing I will say, and then Mike, I promise I want to hear back from you, is that I think it was Brian Stelter who pointed this out, that Brian, how this whole thing about how Trump just watches television, he watches Fox and he gets a lot of ideas. So Brian Kilmeade, I think twice on Fox News, like on Fox and Friends, or I guess that's the show, said that what he should do is get Bovino out of there and put Homan in there. And not too long after the second time Kilmeade said it, Trump announced it as his policy. And we know, in fact, Terry Gross today was just talking to the guy who's done the Tucker Carlson biography. We know that Trump does this, and that this guy who did the Carlson biography, hated by all the right people, said that Carlson used to be a little freaked out that Trump, he thought he had too much influence over the president of the United States. So anyway, those are my thoughts, Mike.
And the slightly encouraging thing, I think, is that it shows that when Trump is really confronted with something, and this also goes to the whole Greenland situation in Davos, he does tend to pull back. I mean, it's like there is a breaking point where he says, well, maybe this isn't such a great idea. Maybe I should somewhat pull back on this whole concept.
TACO.
So
TACO. We have the acronym.
TACO. TACO. Exactly.
Greenland was a TACO, and it's usually, and I think Greenland was a pretty good example, the markets and the people talking to Trump about the markets, and people that he feels obliged to listen to, advising him that what he's doing right now is so reckless and so unpredictable that the behavior of the economy is also becoming unpredictable. And I think when it became clear that another tariff war would come out of Greenland, that I think there were people talking to Trump, people whose calls he kind of has to take, and they were saying, Don't do this. You got to stop. So anyway, thanks for your call, Mike. I know a lot of other people are going to want to talk about this, but as I say, we don't have to only talk about this. And then Todd is here to prove that. Hi, Todd. Oh, Ted. I'm sorry,
hey,
Ted. I'm sorry,
Oh,
Ted.
Ted. Hey, Colin. How are you?
I am just fine.
Thanks for taking my call. So I just wanted to, hear your thoughts on the passing of Bob Weir. I'll put it up front. I've been, into the Grateful Dead since 1980 and saw 127 shows over 15 years and saw at least that many post Jerry. So I'm just curious, because you have very eclectic music taste, which I appreciate. I just wonder if you really were a fan of his work.
I'll say a few things. First of all, to the extent that I was a fan of the Dead, I was probably more a fan of Bob Weir than anybody else, to the extent that you can even extricate somebody from the Dead and say, I like that one, which I understand. The Dead is like an organism and stuff. I will say also in 1980, when you were becoming a fan of the Dead, I was, at that time, America's worst rock critic, trademark.
I remember that.
Yeah, and I actually was at a Dead concert where I was, like, the thing about the Dead is, like, you could show up at a Journey, maybe that's unfair, but that's setting the bar too low. But you could show up at a Journey concert, and you could kind of figure out what's going on, even if you didn't know much about Journey. I'll take it up a notch and say you could show up at a Genesis concert, either Peter Gabriel era or Phil Collins era. You could show up at a Genesis concert, and you didn't have to know everything about Genesis. You could, if you knew a few songs and you knew who the people were, and you knew the style of music, you, as a critic, could produce a passable review. But the Dead, you can't show up for class with the Grateful Dead, on the second to last week of the semester and expect to know what's going on. So I was sitting there in the audience. It wasn't even clear to me when one song had stopped and another one had begun, And so I was asking questions to all these Deadheads who were sitting around me, these really basic kinds of questions. And they were increasingly the ones who weren't just, so high that they thought I was some kind of apparition, but they were increasingly looking at, like, you're the person who's going to write an article about this concert? You know less than the other 14,999 people here. Why would you be writing? And that was a very, very fair question. Now, I will say that, when Bob Weir died, the first thing I played was The Music Never Stopped, which I always thought was a great song. It's not the most Dead song in the world, but to me it's like a great, it's great about what it is, and it really seemed very fitting at that particular moment. So, and I have to be careful what I say, too, because I have one friend who used to work security for the Grateful Dead. He was a big Grateful Dead fan, and he was also, big, strong young man, and so he wound up, I'm not exactly sure what that involved, but it might be one of the few security jobs that you could have while taking LSD. You could still sort of, maybe even it helped. And I'll tell you one last story real quick, which is that Jim Koplik, the famous concert promoter, Jim doesn't drink, I don't think, and he never used drugs, despite the fact that he went all the way through, I don't know when he started, late 60s, early 70s, decades and decades of promoting rock acts. So he had the Grateful Dead, it's pretty early in his career too, out in Waterbury, I think, and Jim tended to have like a can of Pepsi with him. And so he's drinking his can of Pepsi, and he suddenly starts to feel really strange. And then he starts to remember that the can of Pepsi opened kind of easily, and the Grateful Dead had put acid in his Pepsi. And he described it as being on a ride that you can't get off, which I totally get.
Oh, okay. No, because you're probably talking about the shows they played in September of 1972, which were quite noteworthy for that period. So I'd be curious which one he saw. But, what I'd just like to say, I think for Bob, he really, along with Phil, they transformed the songbook, from a cultural phenomenon into a legacy, and I think you can see that in how many younger musicians these days acknowledge the music and enjoy playing the music. Because back in the 80s and 90s, it wasn't really like that. I mean, Los Lobos was like one of the few bands. Elvis Costello was really into the Dead. But, since, the last 15 years, especially with Dead and Company, and the Wolf Brothers, that was one of Bobby's other bands that were really good. a lot of people who were just like yourself, like a music lover, could listen to and go, wow, he's really doing something kind of cool, and he's still doing it. And, and Bob was always true to his form. So
yep.
I appreciate you sharing those thoughts.
Yeah, I totally get anybody loving the Dead. I absolutely 100% get it. But it is the kind of thing, it's a test you have to study for. You can't, it's sort of weird because you sort of think about the Dead experience of people being, in a very enlightened way, pretty messed up while they're listening at home or while they're listening at the concerts. In an elevated way, they're messed up. But, you really have to know a lot. There's a lot of knowledge involved, and you have to pay attention. They've taken substances that will erode their, I would guess, would impede their ability to pay attention. But then you really have to pay attention. So I'm sure there's an explanation. All right, here we go to, by the way, let me just tell you, ask or tell me anything. That's the concept here, 888-720-9677, 888-720-WNPR. Actually, before I go to Lake Como Dave, let me just say this. This is a conversation that we had yesterday at our meeting for the show, the staff of the show. I just was sort of saying, the way things are right now, and this was, 24 hours ago, where arguably things were maybe a little worse, but I mean, they haven't gotten that much better. That, we are seeing, in my mind, we're not on the road to tyranny, we're in the early stages of tyranny. I have some questions about what we should do as a show. And typically our philosophy has been, and there have been exceptions to this, but typically our philosophy has been to sort of feed people's curiosity on a lot of different levels. And that includes doing shows that have nothing to do with an existing, even if pressing, political situation, or doing shows that touch upon a political crisis or a very important election, but in a kind of glancing, tangential way. Sometimes using history or tropes from literature or mythology to sort of look at where some of these ideas are coming from. What we have not typically done is just every day do another show about, how bad things are, even though I think things are really, really bad. And when we did, in the past, we had a podcast called Pardon Me, which was, we did it twice, 2 seasons of it for each impeachment of Donald Trump. And even when we did that, part of our idea was, we're not just going to talk to legal experts. We'll talk to the best legal experts we can find, but we'll also talk to people who write music and who write jokes and who write novels and who come at all this stuff from not a political science or legal perspective, but just, all the things that kind of feed our perceptions. So anyway, so I think what we decided was, and I brought this up on Facebook as well, that people don't really want this in their faces all the time, that we have to do a responsible thing and make sure that we do talk about things that are important. But that people always need breaks. They need someplace else for their thoughts to go, and that they seem to appreciate it when we give them other stuff. So, just to kind of give you a sense, tomorrow's show is going to be about kind of the new protest movement music. And there are people like Renee Christine, who's going to be on our show tomorrow, Monrovia, Jesse Wells, people who are kind of coming along and picking up the gauntlet of writing protest music about this particular situation. And so we're going to talk to and about this new and younger generation of people doing protest music. And we're also going to explore it a little bit in other countries like Venezuela, for example. And on I've already forgotten what we're doing on Thursday, but it's here. It's on my screen. This is so sad. On Thursday, we were working on a kind of long form conversation that would use history maybe to touch upon some of this stuff. But on Friday, we're going to do the nose, and we're going to talk about the Mel Brooks biography documentary. We'll probably also talk about the second season of The Night Agent, which really does, once again, glancingly touch upon the situation that we're in. But it is an interesting question, which I invite you to ponder. What's the right balance? You just can't have your mind on this stuff all the time, or you'll get depressed and crazy. All right, so here we go. We're going to go to Lake Como Dave, one of our founding contributors. Hi, Lake Como Dave.
Hey, Colin. Yeah, and I apologize to Robyn that I'm briefly going away from my topic, but just on that, what you just said as far as like a balance between having various pursuits and things that you can rest your mind. I will say, and not think about politics and violence and all this stuff. I would say that it still does give some relief in my life, but the voices in my head while I'm doing my hobbies or my, listening to music or whatever, they just get really loud. And like, no, you can't be wasting your time on this. You got to do something. You got to, do something to help with the problem we're in. And it's become a greater frustration than it was maybe, a couple of months ago with all this killing and so forth. You know what it reminded me of? Somehow while we were binge watching Gilmore Girls last night, which is one of the amusements that we've been sort of resting our minds in, is that these guys in ICE, these thugs that are masquerading as a security force, it was rattling around in my head that it reminded me of something. And I finally thought of what it was. You might be aware that there was a Rolling Stones concert, a free concert at the Altamont Speedway in California, December 1969. Make a very long story short, they somehow hired, or they just gave
Hell's Angels, as I recall,
to the Hell's Angels to do their security, and it ended up that an 18-year-old woman got fatally stabbed. It just having Hell's Angels there doing security was like, lighting, trying to protect against fire with lighter fluid. It just, it didn't work. So that's what these guys are like. They have absolutely no grounding in actual security or safety of people. They're going quite the other direction.
Yeah, I mean, and I may have missed this, but I don't think so. One of the things that I thought about when I woke up this morning, and this is also to your point, that this stuff does tend to build a nest in our heads, whether we want it to or not. And I'm trying not to let it take over my life. But I woke up this morning, and one of the early thoughts that I had was, what are the names of the people who shot Alex Preddy? I don't think we know. I mean, no. Think about that. I mean, when there's, an officer involved shooting, I mean, a lot of things kind of typically kick in, and there's, after action reports, there's a securing of the crime scene, there's an investigation that starts right away. I watched enough television to know that you have to surrender your weapon, your firearm, that you shot some civilian with. I don't think any of that stuff is happening here, and we don't even know the names of the involved officers. And the idea that that's being kept from us is, I think, a big clue as to, not that we need a lot more clues, but to what kind of situation this is. And it is not a situation consistent with American values or the way we've ever done things. But anyway, Dave, not too much of it. You've got a grackle. You got a grackle in your head now, and it's building its nest, and it's going to want the nest to get bigger and crowd out other stuff. So the stuff that you love is really important. What thou lovest well remains, the rest is dross. What you love is really important. Don't let the grackle chase that stuff out of your brain. All right, we're going to take a break. Deb from Torrington has something she wants to tell us about. Maybe you do, too. You could call 888-720-9677, 888-720-WNPR.
It's a mere conception that sounds appallingly monotonous. Until you listen to the breaking and washing of waves.
Ever since I can remember, anything I own, the light, the smell, the sound, the motion of the sea has been pure magic. And it's been pure magic. It has been pure magic. I love a high expectation. Meet me at the field. Know I'd love to see you. Your friends are my friends. Your clothes are my clothes now. I love a long anticipation. You pay a lot of money for therapy just to listen to me and read me next week. It's hard to get old, but I bite my nails and I always will. My little bad habit that that I love to feel. I always wanna pull in to you.
I could have picked a lot of protest music for today, but that's tomorrow. Tomorrow's protest music. All right, so that's Katie Tucker, by the way. Let's go to the phones here. I did promise that Deb Brown from Torrington would get on. By the way, the number is 888-720-9677. That number can also be expressed as 888-720-WNPR. All right, Deb from Torrington, you have the floor.
All right, thank you, Colin. We've been doing protests in Torrington at Coe Park, since last year. And we set this one up like 2 weeks ago, and now I just wanted to announce it, especially what just happened in Minneapolis. So it's this Saturday from 11 to 12:30 at Coe Park in Torrington. It's a peaceful protest, and Coe Park is on South Main Street across from a big plaza near the library. So that's really what I wanted to say, that we're just trying to do protests as much as we can.
Well, I think, first of all, I salute that. I think, ultimately the narrative has to keep going here, that one of the things that can happen in a situation like this is people get numb and people kind of give up. They get indifferent. That cannot happen. And particularly right now when the tide does seem to be turning a little bit, it seems very important to do that. And I think the other thing that's really important about this, I've thought this since the very first, either the first No Kings rally or the one that preceded that, is that one of the things that helps people survive in situations like this, and you can really see it in Minneapolis, are human ties. The movement Indivisible, which, organizes a lot of these rallies, one of their big organizing tools are potluck dinners. And I think that's really, really great to get people together for a potluck supper. People see each other, they hear each other's voices, they break bread together, having a functioning community. I mean, Minnesota has shown us what it's like to have a functioning community where people look out after each other. If you can get on the side of the Atlantic, read Adam Serwer's story. He did ride-alongs he kind of got himself into the resistance movement in Minnesota and was able to talk to them in a way that not too many journalists have. And that's sort of the point that he made, too, that ultimately these people, because they care about each other and because they believe that a tight-knit community of people from all kinds of different backgrounds can be strong and virtuous in a way that their oppressors can't be, have really proved a pretty important point right now. I'm not saying this is Tiananmen Square or Arab Spring, but it's not that far, and it's going to probably take a lot of sort of public-facing stuff to make clear how committed Americans are to the old idea of America. And let's see. So we got all these things to do. All right, let's go to Jim in Newtown first. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Colin, and thank you. And to your last point, that potluck idea. Here in Newtown, we do what we call a community dialogue, sponsored by our group that we created a year ago, rockthisdemocracy.org. That's one type of event, but lately it's been response like 1 week after the other. First Renee Good, boom, a rally. And what we're noticing a year into having created this, in 12 hours, we had everything announced, the location, the graphic, online, we're networking. And this Saturday, it's March to Melt Ice at 11 a.m. in Newtown, Connecticut, from the old police station up to the flagpole, led by mothers, families, people that are now we've had it. And this is, we emphasize front, left, and center. This is not what America's about. And I just want to close with saying, we realize, like you said before, we do need to see transparency. The agent's name, who shot this, and also, by the way, Connecticut, as you well know, it has been sued by the Trump administration, with Trump saying, we want your voter rolls. That's what's happening in Minnesota. And so that is an outrage. And we are just starting, and we are committed, and it's great to hear what's happening up in Torrington. I think the caller was from. So rockthisdemocracy.org, if you're in the Newtown area, come Saturday, 11 a.m.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking my call.
Yeah, thank you so much for calling. And one of the things that I kind of ask myself, because there probably was a time in the history of public radio where having people call in and say when the demonstrations are, they might not have wanted to do that. I think this is a no-brainer. And I think, at least from my point of view, having people be able to communicate about this stuff, people who want to have peaceful protests and want more people to come to the peaceful protests, I think that's a legitimate role that we can play. I know that there are a lot of questions about what our lean is, but I think one thing that Jim was just trying to suggest, too, when I think he said something like left, right, center, I've been thinking a lot about this. I'm going to get to Mendel in just a second. And by the way, the number is 888-720-9677, 888-720-WNPR. You know, when I started my reporting career 50 years ago, this May it'll be 50 years since the day I showed up in the Hartford Courant newsroom to begin my life as a working journalist. You know, and early on, I was a reporter up at the state capitol. And the Republicans up there were people of, I mean, there are some appalling people there, but there were also probably more appalling Democrats back in those days. But, you know, I can rattle off names. Russell Post, Rusty Post to us. Rusty Post, Larry DeNardis, Jerry Stevens, Ralph Van Nordstrom, John Berman, one of the just great people I've ever met in my life. I could name a lot more. And, you know, Nancy Johnson in her early years. These were people who really did have principles, and their principles sometimes clashed with the Democrats. But, I mean, there's no way. Chris Shays was a young state rep up there. Rob Simmons, Stu McKinney, John McKinney. These are people who would never, ever, ever have any truck with this kind of stuff, who would never put up with it, who would never for a moment support it. And there are still Republicans like that in office. To my way of thinking, some of them have been way too quiet. Some of them are starting to find their voices. But I don't think this is a partisan issue anymore. I don't see how it can be. I don't see how you can have somebody who's trying to help a woman who's been shoved to the ground get up and have both of them be pepper sprayed and then have 10 shots pumped into the back of the guy. I don't see how that's a partisan thing anymore. I'm still astonished at the number of people I see on social media trying to make it partisan and trying to suggest that he and Renee Good had it coming. I don't think these should be partisan issues anymore. It's just, you know, and in some ways I feel really lucky to have lived in Connecticut. I mean, not that we haven't had officer-involved shootings, and we have, and there have been a few of them that, you know, really did require some deep investigation. But by and large, I've seen cops be pretty good at de-escalating, particularly in, I'd say, the last, I'm going to say 20, 25 years. Cops have learned, they get trained in de-escalating things. I've seen them do it. It's a beautiful thing to watch. You take a situation that looks like it's about to tip out of control, or maybe already has tipped a bit in that direction, and you watch somebody who's calmer than anybody else at the scene put the thing back together. And that's how policing is supposed to work. Policing is supposed to make situations get less violent, not radically more violent. It's just a basic idea. And I don't think this is party politics anymore. It really shouldn't be. This should be something that we all agree about. All right, here's Mendel with an unrelated question, but we love unrelated questions. Hi, Mendel.
Hey, how's it going, Colin?
Just fine, just fine.
I'm gonna change it up and lighten the mood just a little bit, even though I agreed with everything that you and the previous caller said. I was just wondering what your take is on having a prerequisite of a cool name to be a broadcaster on NPR.
Well, it works for me. No, I know it's, you know, I know what you mean, and there's a long tradition of that. I think Sylvia Poggioli might have been the person who really inaugurated
from
that.
Spain.
Yeah,
and Sylvia Poggioli.
And I was actually at one point writing a magazine profile of a rock band, and like in the green room, they would talk about how Sylvia Poggioli says her name. And so, yeah, I mean, there's so many now that have really cool names. I don't know. Do I have a cool name? Do you think, is Colin McEnroe a cool name?
Yeah, I think you do, because I always wondered, like, were you related to the controversial tennis player?
I am not. We are both left-handed. The resemblance, I think, ends there. Although when I was in Ireland kind of finding out a little bit more about where the McEnroes came from, I was assured that the McEnroes I was talking to or about in Mount Nugent were not the McEnroes from the tennis thing, but they knew where those people were too. So In fact, I think they said they were up in a town called Virginia, which is, it actually is true. There's a town called Virginia in Ireland. Anyway, I know what you mean. And let me just say one serious and possibly slightly sententious thing about it, and I apologize for that. One of the reasons that I'm going to mess up Diwali's name, but one reason we have a lot of people in public broadcasting with unusual names is partly because, well, there's two things. One thing, the first thing that I got to tell you is that in commercial radio, people don't use their own names anyway. When I worked at WTIC, the general manager used to say, I sign paychecks for people I don't even know who they are. Because if in radio, particularly if you hear somebody who has a funny name, like Ray Dunaway, or a name that is two first names. All the people named Paul, Gary Craig and John Elliott and Paul Douglas and Mike
Gary
Stevens.
Craig, I remember him.
If they have two first names, that probably means that's not their real name. I know what Gary Craig's real name is. I'm not going to say it, but
that's okay. Don't say it. But Michael Ian Ducliffe or David First or Lance Lucky, or my absolute favorite and my favorite sign off is for NPR News. I'm a Fabia Quistacton in Dhaka.
Yeah.
I love that.
mean, and I think the other part of that, so part of it is, we use our real names. But the other part is what you're saying, which is we recruit from a much broader group of people. The people who wind up doing reporting for us, particularly, foreign correspondents for us are often from the areas that they're reporting from. So that's going to lead to people having interesting names. But so I get it. I never really thought that my name was particularly cool. And I particularly don't think that having the same last name as John McEnroe. Although, of course, John McEnroe, because he did figure out, this is one of these things that you have to figure out or not figure out. And it sort of depends on whether you can have a second or third act in public life. But John McEnroe at a certain point realized that making fun of who he was would lead to, he would get to do more commercials that would be very lucrative, but also he could be on 30 Rock as John McEnroe, yelling about stuff that if he agreed that there was something comical, maybe even borderline ridiculous about his public persona, you could go forward. But he could go forward. But I don't know. I never thought of my name as being particularly cool. Just sort of, until John came along, it was just something I was constantly having to spell and explain to people. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll have plenty of time for you on the other side of this. If you want to call 888-720-9677, 888-720-WNPR.
Not born this way. Scared of being erased, scared of being discovered. I live in a city of colors. I live in fear every day. Do you know the color of hate? There must be something in the water. I am America's daughter. Can you tell me the way back home? I know I came from somewhere
All right, time to say some thank yous, starting with the maestro Dylan Reyes, our technical producer, who picked out that song, which is by, let me make sure, it's by May Erlewine. It's called America's Daughter. It's also sort of a little bit of a prequel to tomorrow's show, which is about the new generation of protest music. Anyway, there's him. Jonathan McPants is the producer of this episode. Robyn Doyon-Aitken, who's our boss, is also screening calls, which is why people who are calling up are having, at least initially, a pleasant experience. And you could have a pleasant experience and talk to Robyn Doyon-Aitken at 888-720-9677, presumably before going on the air. 888-720-WNPR. And as we say, anything is okay to talk about. That's probably not true, but nearly everything is great to talk about. All right, here we go with Liz. Liz from Bethlehem. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Colin. Thanks for taking my call.
You're welcome.
You want to know why I called?
I do.
I enjoy everything you talk about. I'm fearful of the government, all of that. But I also have another concern, which is AI overview. My daughter Googles, and she gets AI, and I do too, overview, sort of going before the regular Google and before Wikipedia. And I find it disturbing because it's wrong a lot. And like I tried to figure out what were the buildings behind Lawrence O'Donnell, and they said one was Rockefeller Center. The reason I'm really calling now is that my daughter and I email, and she has been getting AI representing our emails in their own way, and it's happened twice. I haven't seen it. She thought it was something I did. Today, I was reading an article by Tina Brown on Substack about her son's 40th birthday party. My daughter and her son went to school together. She, too, said AI picked up her emails between her daughter, Isabel, and her when planning the cheese board of the birthday party.
See, when you invade somebody's cheese board planning, I feel like you've really violated something. You know,
not so much, but the fact that our emails are open to the public and then presented back to us.
They really. First of all, they shouldn't be, and I do want to know more about this. I do think that there's kind of an uncanny factor that sometimes might not be something like that, which is that they are piecing together little clues. From some of the stuff that's a little bit more public. But, I wouldn't be surprised to find out that they're getting their little tendrils into your emails, too. And
what's public about my daughters and my emails?
Yeah, it shouldn't
Brown
be.
And her?
It shouldn't be.
No.
Yeah.
So there's no real question there, just a concern.
And I think it will be an ongoing concern. I'm not well informed enough about it to say anything else other than.
But ask Robyn to skim Tina Brown's Substack article, and it'll show up that she too got her emails intercepted by AI.
Yeah, I can't ask Robyn to do things. She's my boss.
Oh, I'd ask her.
Yeah. No, I mean, we have people here who could do things. But Robyn's my boss.
You probably want to take some more calls, too.
No, actually, I don't have any calls right now. But I'll say goodbye to you anyway. Thanks very much. And speaking of various people who could just wipe me out, I'm neglected to say, nobody's pointed this out yet to me. Nobody has to. But I neglected to say when Les Como Dave was saying that one of the things they've been doing is binge watching Gilmore Girls, is that obviously now that Les Como Dave is presumably done with it, it's time to start listening to Gilmore Girls Generation, produced by Lily Tyson Quality Entertainment Productions, which, I really feel is, Dave, if you're still listening, it's kind of important to me that you do that because I don't know what will happen to me if you don't. I don't feel safe right now. Anyway, our staff is already looking into all of this stuff. One of the things, it would be one thing that I said to this company when we first started using Slack, and everybody was going, Slack is so great, which it is. I mean, it's a very useful tool. But I said to them, you should understand that Slack probably, in terms of the fine print, owns the content. In other words, they are at least in possession of the content that goes up on Slack, and that if they were subpoenaed and they felt it was necessary, they might be able to hand over stuff that we've already had. And that may have changed. That was years ago that I said that. But one thing that I do really believe in is that when you use something, and AI is going to complicate this beyond all comprehension, but it's like, you probably heard me say this, that I used to say to my class when I was teaching, if you came to a bridge over a mighty river, a big bridge over a mighty river, and there was a sign that said this bridge was built exclusively using the principles of design and engineering found on Wikipedia, would you drive across the bridge? A lot of people wouldn't. So that means, even though I think Wikipedia is an example of a really highly functioning online source of information and technology, but there's certain things you probably wouldn't use it for. And I think what we tend to do is use these things. Well, I mean, to everybody's annoyance, I am not on Venmo. And part of it is because I just don't feel like I understand Venmo well enough. And I don't want to use it in technology that I don't understand. And I think AI is going to make this, it's going to be that problem on steroids. We don't really know what AI can and can't do. And I'm not in any way invalidating Liz's claim, but sometimes it is true that these algorithmically driven models can figure stuff out about us that we don't think we're giving away. But it's also quite possible that the AI is creeping into their emails. I would have no trouble believing that. I just don't know which one it is right now. But AI is going to, and the other problem that I'm concerned about right now is sort of the garbage in, garbage out problem. The New York Times had a big story on Sunday about these kind of spurious researchers who were churning out a lot of studies, a lot of them kind of bell curve type studies suggesting that maybe people from different races and ethnicities have lesser intellectual or cerebral capacities, and that some of these researchers had just managed to get one professor somewhere to sign on to the study, and the rest of them are, kind of at other levels of attainment, lower levels of attainment, but that some of these studies are getting into legitimate journals. And then the next thing that happens once you get it into the journal of whatever is that AI crawls it. AI crawls it and ingests it and adds it to its store of quote unquote knowledge. And so you might have AI spitting back to you something that isn't really true, but was nonetheless somehow or other able to make it into an academic journal. And one of the things that has preserved us a little bit all through the early stages of this process is our belief. It's kind of, actually, I'll just say, one of the questions I want everybody to ask themselves periodically over the course of the coming year is, what is it that we are celebrating the 250th anniversary of? And I think that obtains in a lot of different places. I mean, ultimately, the Declaration of Independence is based on the thinking of John Locke, who said human beings are able to tell the difference between right and wrong, even if they are not kings, even if they, are just simple people. I mean, obviously, they had a very gendered idea about all this and a very racialized idea about all this, but still the point holds. But just in general, ask yourself, what are we celebrating the 250th anniversary of, and how does that look in Minneapolis?
Baby, I've been working some things off, trying to get right for myself, not anybody. Thinking about days gone by, running near Stillwater Creek, chasing huckleberries. Wish I was yours, but the sun been bearing badly, trying to carry on. Still got miles to go, don't go forgetting on me. Don't go forgetting on me.